Is Unit 3, Lecture 1. This is getting us started on the young nation. Let me start the PowerPoint. Here we go. We talked Friday in class about how the country was kind of born with the Constitution, and the year 1789 and beyond, the country began to grow and figure things out. Here's an outline of the lecture. Figuring things out, that's the topic for today. Do a little introduction. George is president. The key man is Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton's plans, and that's the bulk of the lecture today. He actually had a three-part plan. He had a plan for America's debt. He had a plan for a national bank, and he had a plan to promote manufacturing and trade. We're going to focus on the debt and the bank. His plans to promote manufacturing and trade, the Congress didn't end up enacting, and so other than mentioning them here, I'm not going to talk about them further, but you should just know there were three plans. Later, next week, when we talk about Hamilton versus Jefferson and their vision for the country, that manufacturing stuff will come back again. Figuring things out. As we talked about Friday, the Constitution is written, but it's just kind of a skeleton, and we've got to add the meat and the muscle and actually figure out how the country is going to operate and the government. It's vague and in places contradictory. Some places it gives power to the federal government and then it expressly takes it away. The Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, those are two terms you should know, had just vicious arguments about how the government should actually work. And the key question is about power. Who or what group should have power? Who will actually have power? The Constitution did not really settle this. Would it be Congress or the President? How much power would the Supreme Court have? It's going to be this unit that determines that. The North or the South? And most importantly, is it going to be the states that hold most of the power or the federal government? It's in these 60 years, from 1790 to 1865 or so, 75 years, where these questions are going to be answered. And it is going to increasingly be all three branches have power, but the president and the executive branch is going to be muscular. The North is going to end up with more power, mostly because they win the war and because they industrialize. Their economic power is going to give them political strength. And between the states and the federal government, it's increasingly going to be the federal government that has the most power. So for the next over half a century, America would argue and, for the most part, decide these issues. And there's your spoiler alert that the battle between the states and the national government wouldn't be settled until the Civil War. So I mentioned this in class on Friday. The U.S. was the great experiment, and George is the first one kind of in charge when they don't know what to do. Everything is brand new. Countries have always had a monarch. In the beginning, nobody really knows what they're doing, and it takes almost a week for them to figure out what to call the president. George, as usual, plays a pivotal role. So this is the second or third time, I guess the second important time that George kind of steers the country. The first time, of course, is in the Revolutionary War. George is not brilliant. He doesn't have the ideas, but he has wisdom and judgment to choose between ideas. And on top of that, he, above all else, is 100% identified with the nation. People trust that he will do what is best for the nation. And so he has power because of that other people don't have. He is going to form an alliance with Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton is the brains. Washington is kind of the trusted older figure, and the two of them are going to kind of set up the structure of government that we still have with us today. Many of Washington's decisions to seek 2 terms as president, to not get tangled up in foreign affairs, set precedents that lasted long after he was out of office and long after he died. All right, on to the meat of stuff, Hamilton's plans. I'll give you a quick intro on Hamilton. He was born in Caribbean islands. He was illegitimate. His mother dies at an early age, and he's kind of on his own, but he's brilliant, and he eventually gets kind of a scholarship to come to America and study, and joins the Revolutionary Army during the war, is quickly noticed as a very smart soldier, and becomes Washington's chief aide, and is instrumental in the Constitutional Convention and in getting the Constitution passed or ratified, and at a very young age is one of the most highly thought of people in the United States. And Washington is going to tap him to be the first Secretary of the Treasury and to fix the country's debt problems. He's going to come up with the national bank, and he's going to promote manufacturing like I talked about. Hamilton's debt plan. What was it? During the Revolutionary War, the Continental Congress borrowed a lot of money, and during the critical period had done almost nothing to pay it back. And when Washington assumed office, the national government owed about $52 million in debt, and the 13 states owed an additional $25 million. Total debt, $77 million. Hamilton's plan was to pay it all off in full. That's revolutionary. Most people thought the U.S. was not going to be able to pay it off. It was too much, and that they were going to have to kind of declare bankruptcy and not pay back their debts. Hamilton thinks it's important to pay back all the debt in order to show that the United States is a good credit risk. He also offers to pay off the debt of the states, to assume the state's debt. I'm moving a little bit on to why did he want it. The first reason he wanted it was to make sure the U.S. was a good credit risk and that European investors would want to invest in the country. The second thing he wanted was to make the national government stronger than the states. If the national government took on the state debt and paid it off, that would tie the states more strongly to the national government. Why is it significant? It is significant because Hamilton was able to get it approved, and it did the things that he wanted. It made the U.S. a good credit risk, and it made the national government stronger than the states. Who opposed it and why? I put the map up, and you notice those are the 13 original states. We've underlined Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and North Carolina. For the most part, the southern states opposed the assumption of debt plan. The southern states were nervous about a central government that had too much power, and they, in fact, those 4 states had already paid back their state debts and didn't want to have to help the federal government pay off additional debts and pay off, for example, Massachusetts debt. So they said, look, we've already paid off our state debts. Now you're going to pay off the ones that are remaining. That doesn't help us at all, and we're just going to kind of have to help pay for it. So they didn't like it. Let's make sure we understand why it's significant. Make sure you can write down in your own words why Hamilton's debt plan mattered. And I gave you 2 main reasons. Come in on Monday if you've got questions about that. Here's a side story. How did Hamilton get the votes to pass his debt plan? Jefferson and Madison were opposed, and I should explain. Madison is the Speaker of the House. Jefferson has come back from France and is the new Secretary of State. And they are the leaders of the Anti-Federalists. Both are from Virginia, and they don't like Hamilton's plan. They don't want the debts assumed by the national government. And Hamilton does not have the votes in Congress to get his debt plan passed, so they end up having dinner at Madison's house and Jefferson's house in New York City, because the government's in New York City at that point, the capital. That's a picture of Hamilton in the middle, Jefferson on the right, and Dolly Madison passing the ketchup. And they come up with a compromise in exchange for giving Hamilton the votes to pass his debt plan. What Hamilton gives to Madison and to Jefferson, the Southerners, is that the capital of the United States would be here in Washington, D.C., which is between two southern states, Maryland and Virginia. Those are southern states. The southern border is right here, and that is a concession to the southern states. They think if the capital is down in our region, we'll have better control over it. Okay, we're most of the way through. Hamilton's second big idea is a national bank. That's an actual picture of the Philadelphia branch of the First National Bank. What was it? Hamilton wanted a national bank to hold receipts of taxes that were collected, to issue loans, to the money that the government was going to coin, some of those delegated powers. He wanted a bank to operate to handle that. That's why he wanted it. In addition to those things, he wanted a bank because he wanted the central government promoting economic growth. And he has a vision of the country where we are going to be kind of like Britain, a financial power, a manufacturing power, and we're going to go and a trading power. We're going to go grow big and strong. He thought the national bank was essential to developing that. It was controversial because of a question of power. Did the federal government have the power to start a bank? So there's a picture of Hamilton on the left, Jefferson on the right, and this is the big debate, Hamilton versus Jefferson. Hamilton argues that yes, he could establish a national bank because of, you guessed it, the Elastic Clause. Congress shall have power to make all laws which shall be blank necessary and blank proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. That's the doctrine of implied powers. As Mike Considine and some of the other students said, if it doesn't say you can't do it, then maybe you can. And it's a loose construction or loose interpretation of the Constitution. Hamilton not only argued that the bank was allowed, he argued it was needed. And I mentioned that in the previous slide. To collect taxes, you need a place to store the money, and the money that the government prints, they need a place for that. That when you store money somewhere, it's usually called a bank, so he argued that was the rationale. On the other side, Jefferson argues the exact opposite. The bank's unconstitutional because of the 10th Amendment. Powers not delegated to the United States are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. That's where the idea of reserved powers comes from. TJ also argued that the bank would be harmful. He thought that the cities and the financial powers were evil, that farmers produce things and are solid citizens and create things that are tangible, and that bankers don't actually do anything. They just kind of steal money because they don't actually make anything. So he didn't like banks, and he thought that having a government bank would give the government too much power and lead to speculation and people trying to make money in kind of an immoral way. Why does the national bank matter? The bank was important, but the bank itself is not that important. What's more important is that Hamilton won the argument about the bank, and that establishes the idea that the central government could do things that weren't explicitly listed in the Constitution. So if you go back to the Elastic Clause, that's going to win out over the 10th Amendment. Implied powers and loose construction is going to win out over a strict construction. So that is why the national bank is significant. Consequences of the bank. It strengthened the national government. It led to a loose interpretation of the Constitution usually, and the vicious argument between Hamilton and Jefferson led to the formation of the first political parties. So what did we learn? Was the Constitution written in a vague or specific manner? For the next 60 years, our leaders struggled to what? And they argued how much? The key question was, the U.S. was a great blank because why? And Washington was important. Why? But the key leader was not Washington, it was somebody else. Hamilton had three major plans. You should understand why the debt plan was important, why the bank plan was important, and that in the end, because of Hamilton, America was off to a strong start. All right, guys. I thought we were done. Sorry. Finally, we were a good credit risk because of Hamilton. The national government grew stronger, but the vicious arguing led to the formation of our first what? All right, see if you can answer those. That's the end of the slideshow, and let me stop the video. See you in class.